And welcome to EMG 6305, our final session for our collaborate session this term, our semester. Welcome. And this week, we're going to take a look at units 7 and 8 specifically, and then I'm just going to kind of give you a recap of what we learned throughout the entire term, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and kind of tie it together very nicely. And we looked at active threat, active shooter, of course. We also looked at flooding instances. We also looked at being transparent. We talked about different types of communications and communication skills, adaptive leadership, leadership that needs to be evolving constantly, being flexible as a leader. All those things we've talked about during the sessions that we have here, as well as our discussion boards. You all remember that, correct? The answer is yes, because you enjoyed this class. This is the reason why you're taking this class. Of course you enjoyed that. So please remember these specific areas that we covered during the class. And on the evaluation, remember, Dr. Mylan is wonderful. Just kidding. But in essence, let's get started here with all these things. With our collaborate session number 3. So in looking at our leadership, we have situations that are very fluent and ever changing, don't we? Well, in this new day and age of pandemic, we can see that things need to be adapted almost hourly rather than daily or perhaps every other day. This is something that we need to address as a leader, thus adaptive leadership. We need to adapt some of the psychodynamic approaches that we have to observing human behavior, for example. And in this case, let's take a look at COVID-19. So each situation is going to be different. It's going to depend, my two favorite words, it depends. It depends on the area, it depends on the situation, it depends what's going on, it depends on how many patients, depends where the virus is, etc. But in adaptive leadership, you are going to be able to make that adaptation to that particular area. And the situation is going to be dynamic, of course. Thus, you're looking at human behavior being psychological, dynamic, and the way human beings are going to think and how they're going to react in a certain situation. Much as we can see with many of the situations going on currently with this particular pandemic, it just changes by the hour, and the numbers and the facts and the figures keep changing, as well as the medicinal areas that we're investigating right now and doing research on. So that's something an adaptive leader is going to have to take a look at. Being flexible, like we discussed in our last collaborative session, that's a need as well. So adaptive leadership is about helping people change and adjust to different dynamic situations. One thing in life that's constant is change, as well as something changing again in a disaster every 2 seconds. Something's going to be a little bit different. We can see with the global pandemic that there are a lot of dynamic situations that are going on. Some of the hot spots, for example, in the United States will be on the coastal areas, and in the Midwest, maybe very, very few that are occurring. It's going to depend upon the situation, depends on the population, depends on the contact, depends on the spread. If you have several thousand people on the beaches, for example, in Florida, while there is a pandemic that is occurring, one, I'd like to talk to their parents and ask them what they were thinking allowing their children to go down there. But two, you have a congregation of people that are meeting there, and this can spread that virus that much quicker. Now, you as an emergency manager or somebody that's working in the health field or public health entity, you're wondering, well, what can we do about this? In this case, if you have party goers that are being on the beach and they're not in the distance that they should be, the beaches are going to be closed, and that's exactly what took place. You needed to adapt to that situation, and that's what adaptive leadership is all about. Also remember that adaptive leadership spends a great deal of time on coaching followers and focusing on how they can adapt in their new challenges and adapt to different situations, as well as adopting the new changes that are occurring. That's a loaded bullet point there, no pun intended. But what I'm talking about here is that you need to look at how to help other people. And if you're a good mentor, you're going to have a good mentee. Being able to work alongside that person, adapting to those situations, saying, hey, this is the area that I saw that perhaps you should readjust or consider in the next time that you go around. You did very well. And in this positive reinforcement is what the person is going to need. You need to adapt to that situation. You will have a good following if you are willing to work alongside those people. If you're not, and you continually impose your own thoughts and your own ideas without offering humble suggestions and being the humble leader and the humble learner, it'll make it a little bit more challenging for you along the way. So you're looking at a dynamic approach. You're also looking at adaptive leadership as helping people adapt to those changes, as well as people changing and adjusting their own attitudes and beliefs. And then finally, the leader spends a good deal of amount of time here in coaching the followers on how exactly that they can adapt to that new challenge and situation, and also adopt some of those new changes. So in our next slide here, slide 2, adaptive leadership, we look at things changing fast in a disaster. And I mentioned some of those with COVID-19. And then adaptive leadership would be beneficial in times of crisis. So what are those crises? Well, one's a pandemic. That's a crisis, I would say. This is a global crisis. We need to be adaptive. We need to look at the changes that are going to occur daily as well as hourly in some situations, and sometimes within minutes, depending on the gravity of the situation. In this case, we did talk about in our last lesson about flooding. So let me give you a few examples about adaptive leadership. The levees are holding, and now the levees have burst and released tons of water. That's something you need to adapt as a leader. Unexpected inundation of several city blocks that would require evacuation. There you go. You didn't intend on evacuating because you thought that the levees were not going to be breached or not going to break. And then you ran into the situation where they did breach, they did break, and now the water's rushing into several city blocks, and now you have to make the call whether to evacuate or whether to shelter in place or get boats, get rafts, whatever you may need in order to handle that situation. And then finally, one that we're very familiar with here in the United States, unfortunately, and that's dealing with the active threat, active shooter situation. That's a dynamic situation. That's where you need to adapt within an instant, and that's where you definitely need to have your A game on, because something's going to change every 2 seconds. Someone is going to die every 12 seconds in an active threat, active shooter situation, like we discussed in our last collaborate session. And being able to address the SWAT personnel that are going to be on the scene, as well as the people that are injured. This is a very, very large and complex situation that requires adaptation from the leader. So things change fast in a disaster. You can look at things in crisis from the current pandemic that we have, or breaching of levees and inundation of city blocks, as well as the active threat, active shooter situations that we are so commonly well aware of here in the United States. In looking at our next slide here on slide 3, adaptive leadership has several strengths. And I personally like adaptive leadership based on some of the things that we have here, because, again, it depends on the situation, and it kind of frees you up to adapt to that situation. And this is where situational leadership kind of merges together with adaptive leadership. So adaptive leadership here has a multiple dimensions, and it's not just a unidimensional approach that you're going to be looking at with your leadership skills here. Situational challenge. Well, the situation at hand is what? These are all the areas that we are working to perhaps take care of in this certain situation, and that is going to be our challenge for today. Now, if we're looking at the COVID example once again, there's a lot of situations there. You're dealing with a global pandemic, a national pandemic. You're dealing with economic strife and concern, unemployment, and you're dealing with all these things, just to mention a few, all at one time. That's a real situational challenge to handle. And any one human being can't do it. And this is where adaptive leadership and situational challenges are going to come together and merge. But you have a good team working behind yourself, and that's going to minimize some of the stress and strain that you're going to be experiencing in a situation such as this. Regardless of political affiliation or whatever, working together as a team will be necessary in order to reach that common goal. And we're talking about saving people's lives in these instances. And then leadership behavior. A good leader will be able to adapt to those situations and challenges, as well as being able to perhaps promote different thoughts and ideas, or accept different thoughts and ideas from the people that are working alongside that leader. It takes a very, very strong person to stand up and say, this is the way I feel, this is what I think we're going to do, and then perhaps be a little bit humbled by some of the thoughts and ideas and opinions that are coming from the team that need to be identified, and perhaps some of the things that may have been forgotten, quite frankly, by that leader. You're going to have to adapt your own behavior to perhaps some of the people that are working around you, to perhaps the situation once again, and then being able to fulfill those obligations in a very cohesive manner when the chips are down out there in the field. And then finally, you have adaptive work. And adaptive work, I think, kind of ties in together all these areas of situational challenges, leadership behaviors, and then adapting your work ethic to that particular situation. If we're dealing with flooding, yes, it says that these are the things that are supposed to occur during a flood, but they're not really going to, because it's a dynamic situation and something's going to change every now and then you have to adapt your work schedule. The policy states one thing, your work schedule and the fundamentals that are going on out in the field say quite another. So adaptive leadership has a lot of strengths here, and that they're going to exist in a multi-dimensional area and different types of approaches. You have the situational challenges, you have the leadership behaviors that are going to be needed in order to adapt to those challenges, and then you have the adaptive work environment that's going to be surrounding you continually, regardless of the type of disaster, whether it's going to be natural or human-made disaster. Moving forward onto our next slide here, slide 4, we have the psychodynamic approach. That's a mouthful, but this is the type of approach that is going to focus on how leaders approach the observation and interaction of others. So if you break this down, you look at psycho, and I don't mean the movie, I'm talking about psychological. You break that down, and that's what you're looking at, the observation and interaction of the mind and the approach to that, the psychology of how a person is going to react. The dynamic, or the dynamo, like I like to refer to as, that is going to be your fluid situation and how things are going to occur and how that person psychologically is going to change with the situation at hand, and how that person is going to interact with others when the situation may be calm, when the situation is going to perhaps become a little bit more heated, and then after the situation has calmed down once again, you can see and observe how that person is going to react during that time. So that's the psychodynamic approach of a good leader, being able to realize how team members are going to react in a given situation. An emergency manager is going to have to be willing to not only adapt to that certain situation, but also help the team transition through that adaptation process. But you're saying, well, it's easy to adapt. Maybe so in some cases. Some people are able to adapt to situations better than others. Others may have a cut finger, and they're not going to adapt to that very well. It just depends. It depends on the psychodynamics that you're going to experience, what's going to be going on at the time, and how people are going to react to those situations. We can see now with this pandemic that we have a pressure buying, and we're looking at people that are extremely scared in buying everything that they possibly can regarding water and toilet paper. And this is an example of how psychologically they are distressed. Now, the pandemic itself is dealing with health. The water still is going to run from the tap. The toilet paper is still going to be supplied once again by the stores, maybe not in the mass quantity you once so enjoyed in being able to purchase these things. However, they're still going to be there. But in realizing these areas, you have to adapt to that situation. One person is going to adapt like, well, okay, so I have to wait my turn and do that. Others are going to be grabbing by the tons because they feel this impending doom to use that. However, based on our situation here, fortunately, we're able to restock and resupply. It might not be immediately like we all enjoyed for a while, but it's going to be a little bit of a time process. And this is the time process is the adaptation in this case. So understand that the experiences will be different in each person. One person thinks that not having enough water inside the home is going to be a critical thing. On the other hand, the other person that says, well, I'll just get maybe a couple bottles just to tie me over, and I'll open up the tap and I'll have water from there. It's just going to depend on the person. Some people are going to react better than others in stressful situations, and let's face it, even though a stressful situation is just that, stressful, there are dynamic leaders that thrive on stress and perform at their maximum capacity when they are under stress and when they have a lot of things going on at one time. Then there's others of us that perhaps are out there and just saying, okay, this is A, this is B. Wait, I can't take the pressure anymore. Wait, slow down. I have to put C in here to kind of methodically go through this. It just depends on the person. And that's the psychodynamic approach as you're observing your team, as well as your other leaders. Because if you're observing how your leader is working right now, eventually that person is going to get tired, especially in a long event. And if it's one event that is going to last perhaps 12 hours and then turns into 3 days, that leader's not going to stay up for 3 days straight. We're all human beings and we're all going to get tired along the way. Even though that person says, I'm fine, it's not going to be the case. So realize that your observation as perhaps the main person as a leader, or perhaps being second or third in command here in this situation, will create that psychodynamic approach in your observations. The emergency manager then is going to have to be willing to adapt as well as transition the team through that adaptation based on that situation. And then understanding and comprehending those experiences will be different in each person along the way. So in moving forward, in slide 5 here, we're looking at leadership attributes. Ooh, that's a big word. And I don't mean leadership, I mean attributes. You have to be attributed to something. Oh my gosh, it's scary out there, isn't it? So yes, leaders should consider each situation that contributes to human behavior. This attributed to that particular area. That's the reason why this person may be acting a certain way. This person has not slept for 36 hours, and that's why all of a sudden that person may be stumbling over his or her words, and that person needs rest for maybe 3 to 4 hours and then be brought back into the situation room. So each one of the emergency events tend to have extreme conditions. One extreme may be an F5 tornado that is going to rip through a city and going to literally lift the hospital up off its foundation and move that hospital approximately 50 feet, foundation and all. That's an extreme condition. The tsunami that hit Japan back in 2011, that earthquake shook the foundation of that nuclear plant out there and moved that plant approximately 100 feet away from where it was. That is an extreme condition with leaking radiation going into the ocean and them trying to stop it. No one can plan for an apocalypse like that. And keep in mind that you have various phases and stages of emergent situations. One, you're going to have an emergency. So an emergency might be dealing with an ambulance call, for example. That might be an emergency. Another emergency, next level up, might be something dealing with extreme microburst coming through. So that might be an emergency, depending on electrical and gas and things. You'll have a disaster. A disaster would be dealing with your tornadoes, your earthquakes and hurricanes, etc. And human-made. It might be a small terrorist event that takes place, and it didn't work out quite the way terrorists had wanted it to. But in dealing with that would be a disaster. A catastrophe will be something that you're dealing with, pretty much what happened with Hurricane Katrina. That's a catastrophe where you didn't really expect a mega hurricane such as that magnitude to come through and cause all the damage that it did and all the destruction that it caused for people, both psychologically as well as physical possessions as well. And then you have an apocalypse, and the apocalypse is definitely the tsunami and that earthquake that took place in Japan in 2011. You can plan all that you want, especially for the last two, having a catastrophe and an apocalypse. and you could throw all the resources you can at those things, and it's not ever going to be enough. So those are the emergent events. Those are the extreme conditions in a long-winded speech that you need to know and be aware about. So each person in each one of those events is going to react unique in those given circumstances. And I think being able to identify some of those ahead of time and work alongside those people in training exercises as well as educational opportunities will definitely come into play in a unique way, in a different way that allows them to understand that, yeah, I think they're going to react this way, and this is how that person is going to feel. And I can see that through this exercise and understand that is how this person is going to feel, how that person is going to react, and what some of the situations might be once a real emergency does happen. So your leadership attributes, you need to consider the situation that contributes to that human behavior. You also need to understand that emergencies are going to be in extreme conditions, and I emphasized a few of those for you and provided some examples. And then each person is going to be likely to react in a different way. One person's going to react a certain way to, again, the paper cut on the finger, whereas the next person is going to be in a different situation and can handle so many things going through his or her mind, and then being able to adapt to that situation because maybe the stress level that they have is where they function the best. And those are your leadership attributes. So what would be an emergency management lecture without having alphabet police? Yes, meaning the acronyms that you see on the screen right there. I affectionately call them acronym or acrobat police because they are there for your dictionary and your personal references. So NIMS, HICS, and IC. Yes, I see you. That's exactly right. But NIMS stands for National Incident Management System. HICS stands for Hospital Incident Command System, and IC stands for Incident Command, just as a general reminder and a general refresher. Now, with those under your belt, you think that the umbrella of NIMS comes into many challenges for the leadership and will face it in an effort to promote unity. That's basically what the incident command and the hospital incident command we all follow. So those three that I have listed in the first bullet point, they all kind of blend together. And the reason why is you have the National Incident Management System. That is more for your police, your fire, your EMS, etc. And then you have the hospital incident command. I think pretty self-explanatory there, ladies and gentlemen, that this is for hospital. And this is the command structure that they follow. It's the same structure that they have for NIMS, but it's only referred to as HICS for Hospital Incident Command. And then you have the incident commander that would be overseeing the operation. So this is here and fundamentally used for promoting unity, promoting one message coming out, and transparency. I cannot tell you how many times that the press are out there, and especially now with social media being prevalent, they are really looking for and digging for an answer, and they will not leave you alone until you give them that particular answer. The main thing is to be transparent. Under the unified command system that you have here, this will minimize some of those situations where you might not have an answer. However, being under this command system, you'll be able to provide that. So transparency, communication, and the willingness to work alongside one another are some of the key areas where you can actually give them a good response. And the vast majority of those responses are going to be within that incident management system. By the way, there's another acronym for you, IMS, Incident Management System. You gotta love lectures with all these acronyms in there, trying to confuse you all. It's an illusion, but it's really not. This is what we have to learn all the time. So yes, NIMS, HICS, and IC, they all work alongside one another. Under the umbrella of NIMS, you're going to see the many challenges that leadership is going to face, but you're not going to activate each and every part of that NIMS system. It depends on the incident at hand, emergency, disaster, etc. It'll depend on that. Being transparent, being able to communicate and work alongside your team, as well as working alongside the press, can make or break that incident. And the majority of the response is within that incident management system, will be from a team effort, and then everyone agreeing to say, yes, this is the message that we're going to deliver. This is what we know at the current time, and this is what we're going to be giving to the community, the press, the political stakeholders, etc. So that's your emergency services management leadership trends. And looking forward to our future trends as well, the National Incident Management System here is definitely a process, and it's providing guidelines and thoughts and standard operating procedures, training, and the qualifications for leadership to kind of manage an incident here. So if you have a process, then you have something formidable. There you go, formidable, just like abominable. It's formidable, a formidable process that you're supposed to work alongside. A standard operating procedure, SOPs. Ah, yes, you fire department personnel are probably loving every minute of that. SOPs, SOGs, standard operating guidelines. Yes, training. There's a wonderful word. Yes, do it. Train and educate people as much as you can, especially with these incident management systems, because they are not easy to follow. They are very complex. The tree branch keeps going to the left and to the right all the time, and you need to understand how that system is going to work prior to an event. And then this system also allows the key concepts at different capability levels, as well as preparedness, the unified command approach to incidents, and then being able to mitigate some of the practices that are out there. And I think I kind of touched upon those in the previous slide. So your future leadership trends here then are the National Incident Management System, the NIMS, being able to process and provide those guidelines and those qualifications that leadership should have prior to entering into an event. And then that system also allows those concepts and such capability at different levels and different levels of preparedness to flow a lot better, to create a unified command system, and then being able to approach those incidents and then mitigate those incidents when the time arises. And what would be a futuristic approach without any challenges, any deviation from what you're doing? Yes, so future of ESM leadership challenges, they have that nasty word out there and it starts with a T. It's called technology. Yes, we're all in the same boat. We're like afraid that our 5-year-old is going to know more than we do with our use of technology. But this is the world that we are living in. The use of technology is very important, especially in leadership situations. Now with the use of radar, now with all these models that they're able to show, for example, with the weather, there's no excuse not to be able to give a different view or prognosticize, if you will, what is going to take place here in the future, and being able to predict what might occur, for example, with a GIS, Geographic Information System. That's a plausible way of being able to kind of predict the future. And that's where you're getting into being a visionary and understanding some of those schematics that are out there. Communication and communication schematics. Communication is the first thing that always fails in a disaster. We're all familiar with that, and we all know that this is going to be the situation at times, unfortunately. And it even occurs in training and educational opportunities too. But communication is the first thing that we need to make available. We need to make sure that is continual during the course of a disaster. And then how we're going to conceptualize this in our minds. So if this fails, what else do we have to offer? So for example, if the truncated radio system that we have is going to fail, do we have another different type of radio system we're going to use? Do we have 700 megahertz, 800 megahertz ham radio operators, etc.? Or is there a different type of communication program that'll be made available to us? Satellite phones, that's another big communication area that's up and coming. Being able to just literally have a command station that can be placed on the hood of your car is another situation too, where those have become very popular and in tune with everything. So enhancing the visionary skills is going to be a combination of the use of different technology as well as communicating with other people. Yes, we can't sit next to one another and text one another and then give our fellow person right next to us a mean face once that text comes through. We actually have to communicate. You have to put the phone down and actually speak to that person. That's what good communication is. The best method of communication, as you all probably know, it's face-to-face. Looking at the person and having good eye contact and understanding the concepts of what's going on. Text messages can be misconstrued. Text messages can be misread. things can be taken out of context, feelings can be hurt, and then before you know it, you have no supplies. These things can happen. So just be aware of that. But being a visionary to enhance those skills can minimize some of those situations, and then being able to identify the risks ahead of time. Well, if we don't work with our corresponding jurisdictions, then this knows no boundaries, much like the COVID virus. This knows no boundaries. It's going to the next community, etc. And then you're in a situation where you don't have any assistance, or you don't have any funding, or you don't have any masks or help, or whatever it might be, due to the fact you didn't vision this and taking place. You do have a stockpile, perhaps, but not exactly what we thought. Keep that in mind as you're making your plans. And it doesn't have to be for a virus, but it can be for a tornado or another different type of a natural disaster that can occur. Expect the unexpected, overplan, overwork, overstock. And if you have to rotate the stock out and you never have used it, it's okay, but at least it's on hand and you're not going to be caught without having any supplies. And then one problem involves the improved collaborative efforts amongst the organizations and the agencies. We all like to have our toys in the sandbox. No, these belong to me, and I'm not going to share. And that's kind of the concept that goes on out there. Nowadays, we have to overcome that. We have to work alongside one another. We have to be mutual friends. We have to mutually respect one another's thoughts, ideas, shortcomings, whatever it may be. But in order to get this done in a proper way, these are the things that need to be done. Use of technology, having the communication and communication schematics, enhancing the visionary skills by identifying those risk areas. And then one problem that might be minimized is having a collaborative effort, and then bringing those agencies and organizations together around the table and discussing those situations that may occur in the future. In looking at some other trends here, industry-related politics. Ah, yes, the old nasty P word that's coming out there. But politics are involved in everything in every walk of life that we do. Whether it's going to be in training, whether it's going to be going to the store and saying hi to the store clerk that you happen to know. It just goes that way. So we have to address politics as they come. They may be stressful for leaders. They may be something that is a great working relationship, or it might be something that needs a little bit of nurturing and needs to discuss along the way. Political stakeholders are very important because, let's face it, they're the ones with the purse strings. They're the ones that are being able to allocate the funding. They're the ones that are mostly out in the community. And when it comes time for re-election time, they definitely want some of those accolades in assisting themselves, not only in the community, but also demonstrating that they were able to accomplish a lot of goals and do a good benefit for a good number of people. So an area to politics is very similar. You're dealing with the public perception. So now public perception is going to come in and is going to take over because they perceive their leaders. The public is looking at the leaders. The leadership is you. You as well are involved in this schematic. Political leaders are there, but you are the one that they're going to be asking, and you're going to be the one that is the content person that is most knowledgeable in this situation. So much like they do at the press conferences in dealing with perhaps a public health issue, they're going to say, well, you know what, I'm not very familiar with that area. Let me pass you along to someone that specifically deals with that. Here's Mike Smith, who's going to take over for now. And that's what you need to have, is that there's going to be a public perception of saying, well, wow, he handled that situation very, very well by allowing her to speak on her topic, her mainstay, and her focus. And that's a good example of a good leader. And then we have that nasty thing out there called terrorism. And terrorism has the potential risks of being associated with all acts and all walks of life. We don't know when a terrorist event is going to take place. We don't know if one is ever going to take place again. We know that the threat is going to be out there. We have those areas and knowledge where intelligence is going to say, yes, this is probably going to take place and you probably should prepare for this. but we don't know. We don't have that crystal ball. But being able to train and educate one another on these areas and some of these burdens of terrorist acts will definitely be one of the mainstays for the future here in leadership trends. The other situation is the frequency. How many times is this going to happen? Hopefully, this pandemic is once in 100 years or 300 years, for example. We definitely don't want to see anything such magnitude ever again. And this is one example of the 1 in 100 1 in 100 years event that is going to take place. The other situation that is going to occur: terrorist events, disasters. How many times are we going to see earthquakes within the same place, within the same region, doing more and more damage? We just don't know. That crystal ball doesn't tell us. But being prepared for the frequency of those events will definitely provide you with sufficient vision to prepare and train and educate people. So in looking at that, your emergency management trends there, you're looking at the politics of the situation as well as the community politics, looking at the public's perception of those politics and the community politics, and then understanding how terrorism is going to be a potential each and every day, and the frequency of these events, whether it's going to be human-made or naturally made. And I bet you're all getting excited now because we're at slide 10 and you see the word summary. Yes. So let's summarize this term and this semester. So what did we accomplish? I don't know. I'm asking you. You tell me what we accomplished. I mean, no, this is what we looked at, and this is what we tried to accomplish throughout the term. So we're asked the question: what impact does leadership have upon each and every one of us in our professions? We discussed that in great depth. Looking at a good leader and having the ability to influence us with not just his or her knowledge, but being able to adapt to those situations and being flexible. And then a good leader is going to have the ability to believe in their employees as well as their staff. They're going to be flexible. They're going to be offering any suggestions and opportunities to their staff. And then they're going to actually encourage the people that are within their staff or team to strive to be the best, regardless of what the situation and what situation they may be in. Again, you can see how this kind of ties into situational leadership as well as adaptive leadership. But this goes back to kind of what we were discussing in weeks 1 through 4. Furthermore, in looking in weeks 4 through 6, we're kind of transitioning between leaders in the old regime and the new regime, and those could be difficult times. We know that changing can be difficult for people because we're all creatures of habit. We discussed that at great length, and we understand that not all the time change is going to be pleasant at that given moment. However, given a little bit of time, given a little bit of reference, and a little bit of breathing room, will definitely make that old regime feeling go away and some of the new ideas come here to fruition. And it may be difficult to make that transition period, especially if you have a new team or if you have a new leader, but it is imperative for future successful operations due to the fact that things change, people change, ideas change. There's new technology that's out there that is going to help you in the field, so why not embrace that challenge? And then finally here, a positive and constructive manner that will be beneficial in the long run for both leadership and team members. That is going to be needed in order for operations to continually move forward and progress. And quite frankly, have results that have not been there before and move forward in that direction. So transitioning can be difficult, but it can be a lot easier if you do have an open mind as a leader as well as a participant team member. In slide 12 here, we discussed a little bit about active threat to active shooter, and we understand that active threat, active shooter, the locations are going to continue to emerge. There are also not going to be any set profiles for persons that are involved in the active threat, active shooter, and leadership with leadership issues that are with the active threat or active shooter need to be addressed ahead of time. So the locations are going to be dynamic. It's not just going to be the schools anymore, like we've seen in the past. It's going to be political rallies, church functions, carnivals, theaters, whatever it may be. Those are going to be some of the locations. And then you're going to have no set profile for that person that's involved. So it's not going to be one person that may be in their mid 20s with ripped jeans and in a t-shirt that's coming in there. It might be the business person. It might be the colleague that you're working alongside, and it might be a person's wedding that you happen to attend. All these situations are dynamic, thus demonstrating that there's no set profile for this. And then finally, you're asking yourself what can be done about that. And a lot of times it's going to be understanding, it's going to be conceptualization, going to be a visionary for that particular leader, training, education, development, and that big word that we always have to have, funding. Yes, we need funding in order to protect ourselves for these things. Training exercises and education do cost monies. That's why we hopefully have grants and things that are still made available to us. And utilizing those will definitely minimize some of the situations that we may encounter here. But again, active threat situations are going to be dynamic. They're going to change. Policies need to be done. Training and education need to be done for all walks of life, as well as understanding that leadership issues can be quite cumbersome at times if the person in the leadership role does not have an open mind and is unwilling to change due to the fact that this might be such an issue that is very touchy and can cause a deeper reflection, shall we say. We looked at transformational leadership and seeing how that moves around the ideas of leaders being able to assist and inspire groups of workers to accomplish their tasks. Yes, the transformation can be tough at times, but being a good steward, being a good leader, has the opportunity for transforming people into a different mindset. And it won't be easy at times, but if you're positive, if you provide accolades, if you mentor people and you have good mentees that are willing to follow you, that transformation is going to be a lot easier. And then from an emergency management perspective, transformational leaders clearly conceptualize their expectations from the beginning to the end of the response effort. Meaning that a transformational leader, once he or she comes in and makes the announcement, this is the way things are going to be run, that person is going to follow all the way through and not going to stop and not going to be, for lack of a better term, wishy-washy with policies and procedures and say, well, yeah, maybe that'll work. Sometimes this will be a good function, but maybe I'll give it some thought. The transformational leader is going to embrace that challenge, going to make that transformation within that organization or that team and say, well, I'm the new person in charge for right now. I'm willing to listen to your thoughts and ideas. However, we're going to transform this and make this a little bit different from what we did before. Not that it was bad. However, this is the way I kind of like to have things run. And you'll gain even more respect from your team, from other leaders, knowing that you're willing to be humble, as well as other people offering their thoughts and ideas and humble suggestions. In our next slide here, charismatic leader, probably one of my favorite ones if you haven't noticed, but the charismatic leader is someone who's going to demonstrate self-confidence, strong moral and ethical values, and then is being able to communicate those high expectations and finds a way for the listeners, or the followers in this case, to connect with the message. The charismatic leader will be able to tie in some of the visions that he or she has and make it into a nice round, what I refer to as a conceptualization pie, because a little bit of this anecdote, a little bit of that anecdote, a little bit of taste with the crust, a little bit of taste with the filling, as well as being able to wash it down with either coffee or milk, for example. These are some of the things a charismatic leader possesses because it's a little bit different at each and every mouthful, shall we say. And looking at the self-confidence, a person that is able to be dynamic does have self-confidence and multitask many situations, whether it's going to be reading policy and catching up on policies in the event of an emergency and then being able to make a split-second decision, or if it's going to be dealing with the listeners and followers, connecting with the message and reaching out to them and saying, do you understand this? Do you get this? One of the things to remember is that a person will receive that message, and if you can do it in 3 different steps or 3 different ways, that makes a good charismatic leader. 1, you can read it to the audience. 2, you can demonstrate it to the audience, and 3, the verbal acknowledgement of that, making sure that it sinks in, are good qualities here for that charismatic leader. In looking at slide 15 here, being authentic, Yes, this is being transparent, and you have to authentically come out and talk to people and say exactly what's going on. People like to see authenticity, the real person, the real issues that are going on with the event, and not tap dancing around the event. So being transparent and communicating the details, providing the answers to those questions, especially those with a vested interest, and that's dealing with the community, the political stakeholders, as well as the press. And then the second bullet point here allows for a greater sense of community and be able to communicate with others on the team as well as those members in the community. Let's face it, open communication is very good. Being transparent is very good because you do have that sense of greater community. You do have the acknowledgement that, hey, this person truly cares about what's going on here and truly wants to make a difference and positive social change in a positive way rather than trying to hide things and not being transparent. Eventually, during an event, if you're trying to hide things, someone's going to find out somewhere along the line that you told a fib. And then when that comes back, that kind of throws you off track. And then you start to become crippled a little bit due to the fact that you don't have that authenticity. You don't have that transparency anymore. And that situational leadership now turns into defense rather than an offense. Be yourself in any type of disaster or emergent situation that you're going to encounter. Be yourself. Allow yourself enough time and energy and the truth to come out of you while you have the opportunity to do so. It's okay to say, I don't know, we're looking into that. It is okay to say that because that's the truth. You don't know. In my favorite response that I normally like to give, I don't have the answer at the moment, but I am looking into that, and I will definitely get back with you with an answer. And make sure that you follow up because that person, whether it's going to be another leader or if it's going to be the press, they will hold you to that. Just be honest. That's another part of being authentic, living up to your word and following through. So this way you're building credibility, you have that communication, and then, of course, you have that authenticity. And just to kind of conclude here and wrap things up, we probably have been bombarded with a ton of information in regards to pandemic, but these are just some basic things and some areas that I think that are very beneficial to you, especially during this time. And it may last a little while. It might not last a little while, but if it does happen to come back, at least you have some of these things. Remember to wash your hands at least 20 seconds, and especially when you're in a public place or after blowing your nose, coughing, sneezing, etc. You know the story behind that. It limits the spread of the virus. It limits the spread of the hands not being sanitized, and it definitely limits the ability for this thing to be held within the air for approximately 3 minutes. Soap and water not readily available? Use hand sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol, and that'll help mitigate a lot of those germs and kill a lot of those areas that are on surfaces. If your hands, on your hands, on countertops, on linoleum, whatever it may be, but this will definitely mitigate some of that. Make sure that you cover all the surfaces of your hands, rub your hands together, and then dry them thoroughly. They always say avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with unwashed hands. It's very difficult. We all do it. We all push our glasses up if we're wearing glasses. We all, kind of put our eyes, and rub our eyes and things. These are areas that are definitely, passing this along to ourselves as well as other people because it's in the air. So keep that in mind. Avoid touching your eyes, your nose, your mouth, etc. Furthermore, there is currently no vaccine. However, they are working on it, and might take approximately 6 months to get. It might take a year or a year and a half. It just depends. Hopefully, it's not going to take that long based on the current global economic situation that we have, as well as, more importantly, the human life factor that is involved here. In looking at it, the best way to prevent the illness is avoid being exposed to it. How do you know? You really don't. You go about daily life, but you do what the people are telling you to do with social distancing and being able to wash your hands and cover your cough and do all the things that we know are humanly possible that we've done in the past. Just continue to do it. And that'll also help. And listen to the authorities and what they're saying regarding social distancing and social isolation. avoid close contact with people who are sick. Here's my 1980s moment. Duh, yes, of course. You're not going to come in contact with a person who's sick that has this, even if they have pneumonia or it depends on if it's a different type of flu. Stay away from those people and isolate yourself. And if you're sick, please stay home. If you're sick and running a fever or anything that's associated with this particular virus, stay home and stay safe and let this thing pass. That would be some of the humble suggestions that the CDC have, and these are all coming off of the CDC website. And furthermore, if you are sick, stay home. People who are mildly ill with this COVID-19 are able to recover at home. They do they do not leave, of course. You're quarantined there, except to get medical care, and don't visit public areas where there's a mass congregation of people. For example, beaches. If you have a mass congregation there, looking at cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C., and walking around with thousands of other people, be sure that you have an opportunity to stay away and stay isolated from those areas. Stay in touch with your doctor. Telemedicine is a great thing that's going to be taking care of us as far as medical care is concerned, and you can avoid going into long lines there at the hospital, or if you're not infected, staying away from there and being safe in a safe distance. And then avoid using public transportation, ride sharing, or taxis. Even though those are still going to be made available to us, there's going to be that question of being in a taxi and who was in the taxi before, and the type of transportation that we have. Public transportation with the trains in Chicago, for example, they are disinfecting trains and they are disinfecting the areas that are needed to be looked at in order to maintain sanitary conditions. However, try and stay away from them and try and not become too involved unless absolutely positively necessary. And some of the issues that you may encounter with a pandemic or with any disaster for that matter. In this issue here with the pandemic, you're looking at the cancellation of domestic flights. More than likely, they're going to be dealing with military and medical personnel flights only. And then state by state medical quarantine as to the areas that are going to be most impacted. We could see the impact not only in New York, New Jersey, and starting in Pennsylvania, but also in California and the western states as well. We can see possible 4-week closure of restaurants and possible 8 weeks of closure. It just depends on the strain of the virus. It depends on the situations at hand. If conditions worsen, such as in Italy, then we're going to be looking at a mandatory 2-week quarantine nationally, not within the state, but nationally. And it's going to depend again whether or not this social isolation is going to indeed work. It has worked in the pandemic flu of 1918. It has also worked in some of the countries such as Singapore, South Korea, and China. From what we understand, that social distancing and being on lockdown for a little while has made a positive impact upon the virus, but it's going to take everyone to focus on this virus and make sure that they're doing the right thing by social isolation, social distancing, being able to understand those signs and symptoms, and quite frankly, staying at home when necessary and only going out when necessary for groceries or gas or whatever it may be. So these are some of the probable implications of this particular virus. And a note on the lighter side, good news, we do actually have enough toilet paper in the United States. It might not be in abundance that you wanted before, but this is something that's already there. You can actually turn your tap water on as well and not have to worry about bottled water. Farmers are going to continue to grow food, and stores are going to restock as soon as possible. I know it seems like a lot of pressure. I know it seems like leadership out there might have miscommunicated at certain times, but this is a major event that is taking great precedence globally. No one expected this. So understand that, as comical as it may be or may not be, these areas are still going to be there, and you're still going to have these situations that may run in shortages due to the fact that people are concerned, and rightfully so. But understand that these are things that you can do in order to minimize some of your stressors, as well as stressors that are going to be with leadership. And finally, I want to thank you for participating in this class. It's very, very good class. It's a very arduous class at times, with all the situational leadership skills that are needed for our assignments, as well as our discussion boards. Makes you think outside the box. Our colleagues oftentimes respectfully disagreeing with you or with one another, and that's okay. That's what the educational journey is all about, and that's what some of the educational principles here are all about as well. You can see that it takes a little bit of time to be a good leader. It takes a little bit of energy. It takes education. It takes a good leadership experience out in the field. And every leadership experience is going to be different. It's not going to be the same thing over and over again. As we can see from human disasters as opposed to natural disasters, it will just depend on what type of disaster that you're going to have. It'll depend on the team that you have, the team dynamics that you have, as well as the attitude of the team, as well as the attitude of your own self when you're dealing with this. So I thank you once again for your participation, not only in the class, but our collaborative sessions here as well. I do wish you all the best of luck in your upcoming courses, should you have any courses left in the program. If so, I look forward to seeing you once again. If this happens to be your last course, I do wish you well. I hope to see you at graduation, and all the best to you all.